What's up, everybody? It's another episode of Stand Tall. It's January 23rd, and we are in chapter 6 of The Art of War, verse 23 and verse 24. Rouse him and learn the principle of his activity or inactivity. Force him to reveal himself so as to find out his vulnerable spots. 24. Carefully compare the opposing army with your own, so that you may know where strength is superabundant and where it is deficient. Let's go over to an alternate translation real quick. So we talked about assess them to find their plans, their successes and failures, and cite them to action in order to find out their patterns of movement and rest. And then Master Sun says, induce them to adopt specific formations in order to know the ground of life and death. Li Quan says to this, when you break ranks and set up guerrilla squads, you may lay down your banners and drums, your signals and symbols of military organization, to use the appearance of weakness in order to induce them to adopt a specific form. Or you may set up false arrays of campfires and banners to use the appearance of strength in order to induce them to adopt a specific form. If you die by going to them and live by getting them to come to you, this way death and life comes about depending on the ground. Dumu says, the ground of death and life is the battleground. If you go to the enemy on a ground of death, you will live, while if you leave the enemy on a ground of life, you will die. This means that you use many methods to confuse and disturb enemies to observe the forms of their response to you. After that, you deal with them accordingly so you can know what sort of situations mean life and what sort mean death. Yeah, so after you kind of figure it out, and the more you do it, the more you realize which situations mean what. So just through experience. Master Sun says, test them to find out where they are sufficient and where they are lacking. Dumu says, compare where you are sufficient with where the enemy is sufficient. Compare where you are lacking with where the enemy is lacking. Benchmarks. Wang Chi says, compare the strength of the enemy with your own, and you will know where there is sufficiency or lack. After that, you can assess the advantages of attack or defense. So, if it is coming to that, and you do need to compare yourself to what you're, I mean, that's just kind of a natural process of something that you would have to do when approaching a situation like that. Comparing the strength of the enemy with your own, finding out where you're sufficient and lacking, and just making sure that all around you are ready to engage because we are talking life and death here. All right, let's go over to the Daily Stoic now by Ryan Holiday and Stephen Hanselman. January 23rd. The truth about money. Let's pass over to the really rich. How often the occasions they look just like the poor. When they travel abroad, they must restrict their baggage, and when haste is necessary, they dismiss their entourage. And those who are in the army, how few of their possessions they get to keep. Seneca on Consolation to Helvia, 12.1.b-2. Interesting. Let's see what Seneca is going with this one. The author F. Scott Fitzgerald, who often glamorized the lifestyles of the rich and the famous in books like The Great Gatsby, opens one of his short stories with the now classic lines, let me tell you about the very rich. They are different from you and me. A few years after the story was published, his friend Ernest Hemingway teased Fitzgerald by writing, yes, they have more money. That's what Seneca is reminding us. As someone who was one of the richest men in Rome, he knew firsthand that money only marginally changes life. It doesn't solve the problems that people without it seem to think it will. In fact, no material possession will. External things can't fix internal issues. We constantly forget this, and it causes us so much confusion and pain, as Hemingway would later write to Fitzgerald. He thought that the rich were a special glamorous race, and when he found out they weren't, it wrecked him as much as any other thing that wrecked him. Without a change, the same will be true for us. That's crazy. So like when F. Scott Fitzgerald finally like was like glamorizing the rich and the famous, just like many of us do and many of us are taught to do by the media, I think this is directly related to Sun Tzu and his generals in the alternate translation, talking about knowing what ground is life and death, and what leads to life and what leads to death. And so, like, I think that like this false conception that Fitzgerald had of the rich being like he said, let me just reiterate. Let me just refind it. He thought that the rich were a special glamorous race, and when they found out they weren't, it wrecked him. So he's looking at these people like they're somehow different, like they somehow have like some higher intelligence or higher state of being or something that makes them different. But as soon as he got there, through writing about them, the way that maybe many rappers in today's day and age might rap about it, and singer songwriters, etc., it is an interesting thing. But influencers kind of go the same route sometimes, and it kind of like destroyed this belief he had this whole time. And so that would be why you have to do what Sun Tzu is saying and study the enemy and like know the truth, right? Because let's let's go back here to this, like this thing that Du Mu says about, if you go to the enemy on ground of death, you will live, while if you leave the enemy on a ground of life, you will die. So it's like the reverse thing for this too. If you can just like overlay that on what he's talking about Fitzgerald, it's like he envisioned this whole thing and it was the exact opposite of like what he was needing to be doing. But many of us fall into the same trap and thus we die. It like killed him. Like not literally, but it like it just changed his whole perception of reality. And so like how quickly can we change our perception of reality? How quickly can we realize that these things like money are are just things. They're not a cure for anything external other than what the external world demands of you, which is just marketing to you. Whereas internally, the things that give you actual fulfillment and inner peace and give you sense of purpose and duty, those are the things that matter, and money will not change that. And I think that is another reason why a lot of times we see very successful people who aren't doing it for the money. They're not money motivated. In fact, they still live on X amount of dollars per month because it's just like not what they needed. They don't need the money to be flashy. They're not looking for that. They found fulfillment and contentment elsewhere. They've analyzed the situation. They figured out that, I mean, I think for me it's like entrepreneurship. Like it's the thing that I needed. Like thank God I live in America because I can do these things. I can support my family this way and I can go out and earn a living and not have to necessarily break my back to do so, to fulfill certain needs. And that's the thing is there's too much materialistic culture driving us to buy the fast car and to get the big house and to do this and to do that, and you end up sacrificing your entire life to some ideal or corporation or like external pressure that doesn't even exist in the first place except internally, but you just project it externally, thinking that having a membership to this country club or driving this certain brand car, is going to like get you there. But I can tell you from being at expensive country clubs that the richest people there are the ones driving the Toyotas and the 10-year-old GMCs, Chevys, and things like that, because their wealth is concentrated elsewhere, mainly internally with who they are and their character, and that's what you're really trying to do here, through all of this reading, through all of this studying, through standing tall, is trying to define what is good character. And good character carries you through all kinds of war, just like through the art of war, whether it's the internal struggles or the external struggles, the things that stoicism says are outside of our control. And then the Sun Tzu art of war gives us the internal monologue in order to handle those things when they come. That way we're not frozen and dealing and being stuck with the obstacle that is the way, right? So that's why we keep standing tall. Thanks for joining me. See you on the next one.